Hi, I'm Rebecca Kosick, and I co-direct the Bristol Poetry Institute. I'm a poet and translator and scholar of the Americas, and I'm really pleased to be here today recording this conversation for the Printed Poetry Symposium at the Center for Fine Print Research at UWE, University of the West of England. And I'm here today to talk with Ken Mikolowski. He is the author of multiple poetry collections, including That, Thank You, Call Again, Little Mysteries, Big Enigmas, and Remember Me. His poems have appeared in Brooklyn Rail, Hanging Loose, Exquisite Corpse, and Abandoned Automobile, a Detroit anthology, among other places, and have been recorded by the Frank Carlberg Group. Mikolowski taught poetry writing at the University of Michigan for decades, and along with his wife, Anne, was publisher, editor, and printer of the Alternative Press, which is what we're here to talk about today. Founded in Detroit, Michigan, the Alternative Press was a small, innovative, and often, but not always, letterpress publisher of American art and poetry from 1969. So I'm so pleased to welcome Ken Mikolowski. And Ken, since we're here taking part in a printed poetry symposium, could you talk a little bit about how the Alternative Press got started with letterpress printing?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I'm glad to go on and on.
All right.
Listen, I'm not sure I should admit this in this symposium, but we didn't begin with an interest in printing letterpress. We began by actually moving a 1,200-pound letterpress into our basement, never having printed before in our lives. We were more interested in being publishers, not in being printers. We had no idea that what would happen. We moved this press into our basement. It was an intimidating presence, that's for sure. It demanded we learn to print. And we were entirely self-taught. Everything we did was, was a mistake. And then finally, we got around to doing something that was became the Alternative Press. But one of the big events for the Alternative Press that sort of moved us from being local to sort of national or international even, was when Allen Ginsberg came to stay with us in Detroit. He stayed with us for a week, and we printed a poem of his, and that sort of put us on the map, I guess. He started sending people to come visit us. Oh boy. He sent Ann Waldman, and Ann Waldman sent Joe Brainerd, and Joe Brainerd, and we just on and on and on. Everybody came to stay with us in Detroit because we had a press in our basement and we printed their poems. So that was the way it went. That's how the press started anyway.
And so when you were getting started and teaching yourself, but also it seems like working in a real community environment, not just with these out-of-town visitors, but also with other things going on in the Detroit art scene at the time, how did that affect sort of like what you printed and how, or if the press developed a kind of aesthetic or not?
Well, we had no aesthetic. we were really.
You did, I would say.
We wanted to publish all these poems, and so everyone became an individual challenge and became its own project. We started in '69, right? But I think it took us until about middle of '70 before we really knew what we were doing. But once we got onto it, we just kept rolling with it. New things came in, we just kept printing them, and that was the way it went.
So I thought we could take maybe a closer look at some of the examples of poetry, even though we're seeing quite a few go by in the
Yes, already to go. Yeah, there they go.
But so you published in a few different formats, right? Most of them sort of on the smaller side, I guess, which was maybe also part of the hand printing impetus, let's say. So postcards, broadsides, bumper stickers, and bookmarks. And so I thought we could look at a few of those and talk a little bit about the different formats and how they came together. So I'll stop the slideshow for now, and then we'll take a look at some of these other images.
Right.
So the first one that we have, actually, but the first one that we had to talk about today was this one by Robert Creeley, One Day After Another, Perfect, They All Fit. And I know you worked a lot with Creeley over the years. Do you remember how this one came together?
Yes, Bob sent it to us, and it's one of the few things that he said he'd like it to be a postcard. Most people just send us things and not knowing what we're going to do with them. But Bob wanted to have this one be a postcard. So we tried setting it in a number of different styles of type. And believe me, they just were too busy. Finally, we decided simplicity is the way to go. And so you can see the elaborate different types, but we finally went with a beige postcard and a little darker brown print, or a little rust colored print, and made it as simple as we could possibly make it. Let the poem make the statement, and it does.
So did you have all of those different sets of type in your workshop or your basement, I guess?
Right, we did. When we started the press, I want to give a little background. It cost us $125 for the press. It's what we could afford to do. In our first year of operation, everything, we bought used type, of course, we bought all kinds of equipment to go with it, and it cost us $800 for our first year of operation. We printed everything for that. And then we sent it out. We sent it out for free for the first 2 years. It was, a lot of the poems say, a free poem from the alternative press. But we found out that bookstores didn't necessarily respect that. So we would send them, they'd say, love that Ginsberg poem, send us more. And of course, we would pay the postage and send it to them, and they were selling them. You could follow the hierarchy of American poetry by how much they were charging for each piece, so.
Yeah, you can still find alternative press postcards and other things on sale and various rare book dealers online today. So I guess that trend hasn't stopped. All right, well, let's look at another one then. So we
Sure.
have you did a series of bumper sticker poems, which is a pretty unique format for printing poetry. And this one, Blame God by Diane Prima, is maybe one of the classic alternative press bumper stickers, although they're all good. But so in this case, since this is a different format, were you working with external printers at the same time for some?
No,
you printed this?
no, not at all. We printed that ourselves. The big type is a wood type that we had, we got from some source, and we used that for this particular poem, this particular piece anyway. I'm not sure it's a poem. It may be. Diane wrote it, so okay.
Say it's a poem.
Yeah, it's a poem. I thought of this, you asked about, the international or interstate trade. Well,
Yeah.
I imagine this poem being on a pickup truck driving through Alabama. So it made a statement too.
Yeah, and it could circulate like outside of the traditional. I mean, this is true of all of the things that you published for the most part. They weren't really bound in books or kept in some kind of dusty academic shelves, but were really getting out there into the world. Because I know from my research, looking at the archive, you see poets not only making postcards with you, but also then they're getting them in the mail, and then they send them back to each other. And so they really were used, right? Even these bumper stickers, I were on all kinds of automobiles, perhaps driving around Alabama or wherever. So did you just order the bumper stickers blank then, and then you printed them?
Yes, that was it.
Fascinating.
We did the printing, but we got the paper and used it. That's how I think the first one we did was that one that said the Grindstone City, or no, that was first one we did was a Tom Clark bumper sticker that was a political statement in the 60s, I guess. It just said, more hair every day.
Yeah, I think we saw that one go by in the slideshow, maybe. Yeah.
That was the first one we printed, and that's because when the batch of stuff we bought one time, there was a stack of bumper stickers. So we thought, oh, we could use these. Well, then after that, we had to buy our own paper and do the bumper stickers ourselves. But the Tom Clark piece was a fun one to do too.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how sort of these different chance events kind of motivated the alternative press, and then it began to influence the kinds of things you were printing and also the kinds of poetry people were writing, in these sort of short a lot of them are funny. I think a lot of people take advantage of the format to be.
That had something to do with the editor. We had a little sense of whimsy ourselves, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely part of your aesthetic too.
And by the way, I haven't mentioned this to one of you, but my partner during all this time was my wife, Anne, who's
Yeah.
been deceased now for 22 years, but she was really active in setting type, printing. She did more than I did because she did the artwork too. She did many drawings and prints that were magnificent. Actually, she was quite a good artist.
Yeah. So
when we started the press, I was a poet, Anne was an artist, and we started the press to print poetry and art, so we could find 3 different ways to not make a living on what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, so she did all of the press marks, like this image of the buffalo and other things that show up on your work as well?
Well, yes, the bison was a wood engraving that we found that was made in 1901 as a tobacco label. And we found that among a bunch of other old wood engravings. And somehow we decided that the bison was a real symbol for what we were trying to do, which was resurrect the lost art. And bison came back, and so did the press. We thrived.
And the bison influence of bison-related poetry among some of its contributors too later. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about just coming back to art and poetry and that mix. So here we have this bookmark by Joe Brainerd, and I was mentioning that, you know, with every year of history, it seems to just get truer and truer. This history piling up so fast, almost every day is the anniversary of something awful.
Art is supposed to be permanent. Nothing can be more permanent than that.
Yeah, it has definitely a lasting message. But yeah, so Brainerd, he worked with you quite a bit. Like a number of these poets did lots of different works with you, and he's also a visual artist, of course, as you know. But how did you think about that, sort of the relationship between printing poetry and text, or printing art, or these more intermediate objects? Was this a chance for poets to experiment a little bit more visually, or for artists to experiment with poetry, or how did you think about that kind of relationship between the different arts?
Well, Joe was an outstanding artist and an outstanding writer. He was brilliant in both areas. And so it was good that some things he did, like this, was his writing, and we just decided it didn't need anything more. The statement itself was just fine, thank you. Some things were enhanced with artwork, and some things were just typography. That's what we would do.
Yeah, so we've been focusing on most of the kind of print things, the things that you guys letterpress printed, because that's part of the theme of the symposium that we're talking within today.
Yes.
Do you want to say a little bit too about the multiple original series? Because some of those went by in the slideshow that we had playing earlier, but this was a case where artists and poets were creating original works of art on the front faces of postcards. And you were printing the sort of reverse, right, where someone would write the message and the address.
I would think that's probably the most important part of what we did as a press.
Yeah.
We turned artists and writers loose with 500 blank postcards, blank on one side and with the artist's name or poet's name on the other side. And they did 500 original, no two alike, every one different. Ted Berrigan, Alice Notley, Joe Brainerd, go on and on and on, Ann Waldman, Ed Sanders, on and on. People did, Robert Creeley did 500 original poems, in which he kept no copy. We got a note from his bibliographer saying that we had to make copies of those poems because the only format that existed in was that one piece of paper. Then we sent them out to our subscribers. And that's where they got dispersed. Nobody ever made copies. Creely said, somebody asked him, how much did they pay you to do that? And he said, if they paid me, I wouldn't have done it. So that was the spirit of what we did.
Yeah, it seemed like that project was really an invitation to poets to not only the brevity of the postcards, because they had to write somewhat short poems, but then at the same time, the kind of duration of the project was really monumental, because you see people commenting on that, like how they think they can do the 500 postcards, no problem. But then it turns out to be, well, maybe not a problem, but
No, it was. For some people, they could not finish it. It was either liberating or constipating, one or the other.
yeah, but that was a great way in which the press, although you guys were doing, the printing yourselves in, collaboration in some ways with the poets who were submitting, and you were thinking about how the different formats could respond to the content of the poem. Like maybe they need artwork, maybe they don't, maybe they need this size or this size or this format. But also, when you did the multiple originals, you were still printing on your press, but then sort of opening up an invitation to the poets and artists to be involved in that process from a different perspective.
It was the lazy way to print, we let the poets and artists do the work. All we do is print the backs, and they did all the rest of the work. We've always been very, very economical about our work.
All right, well, that's a good tip for the next generation of printers, maybe. Well, thanks so much. We're out of time, but it's just been lovely to talk with you today.
It's been great to talk with you. Thank you, Beck.
Yeah, and then I'll look forward for those people who are attending the in-person roundtable. We can talk a little bit more about the alternative press, and be in touch if you're interested in any of the research I've been doing around the alternative press, which is a fantastic project to be involved in still at this point in the 21st century. So thanks, Ken Mikolowski.
Bye-bye.